Welcome to another episode of Quest for Twice. Today, I'm going to discuss a new valuation metric because I'm a value-oriented investor. It is important to have various ways to understand the valuation level assigned by the market and compare that with the intrinsic value to see if there is a good investment opportunity. So the metric I'm going to discuss today is enterprise value over EBIT. EBIT is earning before interest income. In a very efficient market, the enterprise value should equal to net present value of the future free cash flow it will generate. So enterprise value should equal to free cash flow divided by discount rate. If the annual free cash flow is constant into the distant future. Free cash flow is before interest payment, but after subtracting tax and maintenance capital. Discount rate is a cost of capital, which can be calculated by looking at the weighted average of debt and equity investment. So I'm going to get into that a bit later. Another key assumption about this formula is that it assumes the management are good steward of shareholder value because usually the free cash flow is retained by the company. Then later on, it will be used mostly at the discretion of the management. There could be scenarios where a lot of free cash flow is generated and retained, but later on the management just use it for a very expensive acquisition or some other inefficient use of capital, like buying back shares when the share price is significantly overvalued. So this formula assumes that the management take a good care of the shareholder interest. One way to calculate the free cash flow is using EBIT, then subtract the tax impact. This assumes the current DD&A, depreciation and amortization, represents future maintenance capital. So a company is undervalued if its enterprise value over EBIT is less than 1 minus tax rate divided by the discount rate. That's why EV over EBIT can be used as a valuation metric. Next, I'm going to look at the several companies in my portfolio and their EV over EBIT to see if they are overvalued or undervalued. The first one is Meta Platforms, aka Facebook. Currently, its EV over EBIT is about 8.9. That's less than threshold of 10 if I use 8% discount rate. And this assumes the pricing power is less than inflation and its future free cash flow will stay constant. So I consider the Meta Platforms undervalued even if we assume its current R&D spending at about 23% of revenue will not drive future growth, and its sales and marketing expense of 12% revenue will not drive future growth either. So basically, we assume the heavy spending on R&D and sales and marketing will only be able to keep its future cash flow constant. So even with that very pessimistic assumption, its EV over EBIT is significantly less than 10 and tells me that it's undervalued. And by the way, Morningstar.com gives Meta Platforms an excellent rating for value stewardship. Next is energy transfer. So this is a bit more complicated. We'll start from EBITDA estimate of $12.7 billion based on its guidance for this year. Its EBIT is about $8.6 billion with the DD&A about $4.1 billion. However, if we look at its planned capex, it's only $2.6 billion, less than the DD&A. That's because of energy transfer spent very heavily in the last decade, really, on capital expenditure. A lot of that capital expenditure has been wasted because of the very high price it made in acquisitions, as well as cost overrun its capital projects. So its EV over EBIT is 9.6, less than 10. However, it becomes 8.2 if we assume future capex is constant around $2.6 billion instead of $4.1 billion. Its value stewardship is poor according to Morningstar.com because it prioritizes dividend over buyback. And it also has a poor M&A record. However, as long as it keeps its future capex in check, then the valuation metric is still very attractive. Next, we look at Kinder Morgan as a comparison with Energy Transfer. So its 2022 EBITDA guidance is about $7.5 billion, and its EBIT is about $5 billion. Its DD&A is about $2.5 billion, comparable to its planned capex of $2.2 billion. So its EV over EBIT is about 14. So I consider that as a bit overvalued or fairly valued at most from this metric perspective. But its value stewardship is okay. So as a comparison, I think Energy Transfer offers more upside. Next is my favorite stock, Adcore. The management gave a guidance for long-term EBITDA about $600 million per year. Its a recent trailing 12-month DD&A is about $80 million. And we can assume it'll be $100 million because of recent mergers and acquisitions. That leads to a EBIT about $500 million each year. Then its EV over EBIT will be about 7.4 at $75 per share. It has a very good value stewardship with a good track record of wise acquisitions and share buybacks. So I think Adcore is significantly undervalued. The last two I'm going to review Emerson and Ingredient. So EV over EBIT is 12.8 for Emerson and 10.8 for Ingredient. I consider either of them is still a good investment because of future growth opportunities. For example, the Emerson is a play on automations. I believe that will be a trend well into the future because of the labor shortage. And the Ingredient is a play on the future growth of healthier eating from plant-based ingredients. So that's why the valuation threshold can be 13.3 if just a free cash flow simply keeps pace with the inflation of 2%. And the threshold increases to 16 if free cash flow can grow faster at 3% per year. And that's quite doable for steady growth opportunities I mentioned earlier. So this concludes the review of the new valuation metric I will be using down the road. Hope you find this episode useful. Until next time, happy investing.